I'm here with Topaz Smith from the World Economic Forum. We are at the GSTC conference in Antalya. Hi.
Hi,
Thanks for coming.
thank you for having me. Thank you.
So, the first question, what is the role of the World Economic Forum in supporting, promoting, and developing sustainable tourism?
So that is our agenda. Recently, we created the Global Future Council on, also known as the GFC, on sustainable tourism. And so it's really embedded into the work that I do, particularly as community lead of aviation, travel, and tourism at the forum. And, it's seen throughout how we work with our partners, how we scope our projects and initiatives. And one of the main projects that comes to mind is decarbonization, and really focused on, some of the work that my colleagues have done in the Center for Nature and Climate, which includes the Clean Skies for Tomorrow. It also includes airports for tomorrow. And, some of the work that's really being developed at this time around SAF fuels, around green corridors, and, sustainable products that are alternatives to plastic and other, carbon filled carbon filled products that we're trying to move away from. And so I think we've diversified our scope, but mainly we're very, very focused on how do we make this truly sustainable? How do we and when I say truly sustainable, I mean, it varies throughout the supply chain of travel and tourism, and then the complexities of it all. But we're really focused on making sure that this is not greenwashing. This is something that is true to what the world needs to be. And really, how do we get to zero carbon emissions, throughout the supply chain and throughout the industry.
And you mentioned before we started the interview about some other very cool initiatives that you are having around sustainability. Maybe you can share about them as well.
Sure. So some of the initiatives include the Accenture report that my colleague Maxim Shoshkin, who also works on the Travel and Tourism Development Index, a report that the WEF produces, focused on travel and tourism and infrastructure globally in different countries and economies. That report, I think, is really important, and we work in collaboration with Accenture on that. It's important to show how to influence consumer behavior when it comes to sustainability, because that's ultimately one of the most important things in terms of really being able to build out, a sustainable plan throughout, the tourism industry. It has to also come from not only from the vendors, from the businesses and the institutions, but it also has to come from the people that are engaged in activities. So I think that's a really interesting white paper that addresses some of those concerns. There's also the challenges of developing sustainable products, and I think it's really important to address that, because that goes into some policies, right? That goes into some of the realities of investors not really understanding the long-term value of sustainable products and how it really does pay off, in the future. Many are looking very short-term. And so they really want to understand how much the bottom line is being affected and not necessarily thinking about what the future holds. So that is one white paper that I think can address some of the concerns around one, consumer behavior, and secondly, investments in the sector, which we need to do, because in order to, develop, we have to put research, we have to put dollars into understanding what exactly we need to create. So as alternatives to plastic and other things that we really shouldn't be using anymore. So there's that. I also wanted to talk about the Travel and Tourism Development Index, which I referred to earlier. It was previously called the Travel and Tourism Competitiveness Index, but that shifted, when we really thought about the pandemic and the changes that are happening drastically within tourism infrastructure globally, and the need for so much more inclusiveness and sustainability, and environmental sustainability, as well as policies between the private and public sector. So that report is quite important because it's the only global report that looks at 117 economies globally and really ranks them according to the areas in which they are working towards, but also the areas in which they sort of fall short. So it allows countries to really think about the ways in which they can build and create action plans for the future.
So my next question would be like, you mentioned also like avoiding greenwashing. So here comes the certification and GSTC, shaping the consumer behavior and how we can influence consumers. How do you work, if anyhow, with GSTC or with Travelist? So these institutions that are promoting sustainable tourism.
I would say that our relationship with GSTC has been there, but it's been more secondary. So we know of GSTC. We have been in the room with GSTC. Obviously, we work on sustainability, but I think this conference allows us to really come into collaboration a bit more. And I think it's the time. There's so much happening. Climate change. Earlier in the in the session that I moderated on sustainable tourism being a driver for resilient economies and societies, we really, wanted to come together to talk about the realities of the sector and what's at risk, and what really are the opportunities and gaps in the sector. So I would say more of these dialogues, and I would also say potentially, seeing how we can pilot some of the focus areas that are overlapping for both of us and are really needing to be built out.
Hopefully there is some more collaboration going on after the conference. The question that everyone is asking, is there a real demand for sustainable travel? Is the demand growing, or is it our wishful thinking?
That's a very good question because I think it's on everyone's mind. I think there's definitely a change in terms of the future and sort of the generation that has come. So thinking about Gen Zers specifically, they are very different from, let's say, baby boomers and millennials. I think, there's a lot of, it depends when you were born, but there's concerns and, there's also just an attitude of, there's no excuse. Right. And so you see more of that with Gen Zers not tolerating, we can't do this, or, here are the hurdles. They want to step in front of the hurdles or step over the hurdles and say, how do we build and how do we move forward? Because this is the only planet that we have to live on currently. And I know there's I also work within aerospace, so I'm not trying to make anyone or of our partners upset about that. But ultimately, right now, we are living on planet Earth, and we need to find a way to make sure that we can sustain life here. And so I think there's a lot of appetite for change and adapting to different ways of life. And so I really do believe that, the demand is there. I mean, you can see it in terms of how businesses are functioning now, what consumers are asking for when they're going into these businesses. And so, they're saying it, it's not even us really, it's the consumers that are demanding the businesses to have this, and it's influencing their choices. And so obviously for a business, you want to maintain that and you want to increase your growth. So they're listening, and I think they are developing ways in which they can change their ops and some of the products that they have to align with customer values. So
do you have any ideas, suggestions for how to engage the other generations into sustainability, those who are right now a bit more skeptical?
Yeah. I think it's really just showing them the reality of, okay, what happens if you don't do it? I think that's the only way of really getting to, the nitty-gritty of why they should change behavior. For some, maybe they don't think it's not relevant for them in their lifetime, so they might not change behavior. But I think the reality is how do we continue to share what will happen if you don't do or if you don't change and adapt and really think critically about the future of the planet. So
My next question is, what is the future? So how do you see travel changing in the next 5?
yeah. Based on a lot of conversations that I'm having with civil society, with NGOs, with private sector, with public sector, because just like in my line of work, we have to, focus on public and private partnerships. Uh, it's really diversified, and I think the pandemic definitely accelerated a lot of these changes. So the reality of SAF fuels, right? That's being developed, and I think in the next 5 to 10 years, we should be able to see much more, products that are a bit more. Right now, there's a lot of experimenting going on, so they should really hold ground at that time. Obviously, it's going to take a lot of research. It's going to take time. It's going to take money. And so a lot of work is being done to make sure that in the next 5 to 10 years, we have something that we can work with and we can start to really decrease a lot in our carbon emissions. I would also say throughout the supply chain of traveling tourism, which is very complex, from everything from food to fabrics to, community socioeconomic development. So, looking at SMEs and the labor force, I think, there's going to be a lot of reskilling and upskilling. Digital transformation is definitely underway in terms of contactless systems, more online activities. So you think of the metaverse, you think of, the ways in which products have diversified throughout the pandemic and sort of what development is looking like right now throughout the sector. I think it's quite vast. But I believe that given, a lot of the work that's happening, especially the innovative work that's happening around startups in the travel and tourism sector, I mean, there's going to be a boom and a shift in terms of what we traditionally do as business practice to what will happen in the future. So
Thank you for this interesting insights to the future. The last question, what is your key takeaway from this conference? We are just about to end the conference, so
I would say there's hope. That's something that, I saw, within, people and attendees throughout the conference. I think the realities of the different projects that are happening, although sometimes things are in silos, which unfortunately, I wish they, there can be a bit more cohesiveness and streamlining of some of the projects and initiatives happening globally, which I think is the reason for a lot of these international multilateral institutions, coming together and bringing the relevant stakeholders to the table, which WEF does, to talk about some of these issues and to make sure that, we do align, and the redundancy is a cut down a bit more. I think just by being here, understanding that standards and sustainability standards rather are becoming much more aligned with business interests, especially private sector. Seeing how many private sector individuals are here is just really impressive, and it's good to see that they are looking long term, and so I think that's hopeful. So thank you again for having me.
thank
It's
you
a
very
pleasure.
much.